Disappointing season. A lot to sort through here. 48 wins, good for an 8 seed, but who cares? It's not good enough. There's a lot to unpack. Glad to start wherever you guys want.
Be the next head coach for the Grizzlies?
Have not made any decisions on the coaching front at this point. Going to digest everything coming out of the season. Obviously, as soon as I've made a decision on anything substance, process, I will share it.
Vet other candidates throughout the process as you go through that?
Yeah, on all fronts, I've been 100% focused, with the rest of the group on trying to make the most of what, turned into a, excuse me, challenging, certainly end of the season on multiple fronts. I'm going to digest everything, and as soon as I've decided on any aspect of what comes next on the coaching front, obviously I will share that news.
Zach, do you still believe the core of Ja, Jaren, and Dez is capable of getting you to the place where you can compete for championships?
I think there's so much good. I think you can see at the peak, times of what this group has done. It's right there, and there's so much to hold on to, and there's been so much growth. They're beginning to enter their prime. There's I think for each of them, and I'll talk about each of them here. I think there's significant steps that have been taken, in a really positive direction. I think for anyone, I don't think this is, news to anyone in this room, but I think anyone who's been watching closely has seen with Ja, an organization and a player that are growing closer, and we've tried to do, everything we can to put him in positions to be successful. He and I have worked through a bunch together and grown a bunch together, and I think we are in the healthiest place that we've been. I've seen a ton of growth from him, and I think you could see over this, whatever stretch, over the last month, some really high level basketball. Unfortunate, getting knocked out, of game 3, about halfway through, and there's a lot of what ifs, right? There's always, what could this have been? What could that have been? Would the series be, 2-2 if we just had Ja? Yeah, maybe, but also it didn't happen, and that's not good enough. And I don't think it's acceptable from a, no, that there's a lot to work on there. I think we have to just more generally, this is not a commentary on those guys. I think more generally, we need to have a very open mind, from a team building standpoint of what we can do to put this group in the best position that we can, going forward. But it doesn't matter. It hasn't been good enough. We've made it to the second round once with a really talented but unintentionally young. I don't know who needs to hear this. We're not trying to make the team younger. We drafted Jalen Wells this year, and that was someone who I thought 100% was going to be in the G League and have a developmental year, this season. But I believe in competition. I believe in merit. And he beat out the vet and earned the starting job and ran with it, for the course of the season. Thank you. We've been adding veterans. Derek was a really positive presence. He retired, on the eve of the season, but he made really significant contributions to the locker room. Lamar Stevens made really significant contributions to the locker room now in both of his times, with this group. That's why we went out of our way and prioritized, bringing him, in. I digress, and let me talk about the rest of the core 3. There's plenty more to unpack there, but there's a lot of good with Ja. I think he's making meaningful strides in the right direction. Jaren had a fantastic season. Jaren continues to get better, every year. He's open. He's receptive to feedback. He's taken a step forward on so many fronts. I have no doubt that he's going to continue to. And Dez had a healthier season, a under the radar, fantastic season. I think there's so much good. I get the question. I respect it. Of course, there's more work to be done. There's a level that I think everyone has to embrace and be willing to get to get to, reach the ultimate goal here, certainly. And in many ways, I don't think we can look back at this series and this season and say, oh, we're close. No, we're not. We're not close. There's a lot of work to be done. I need to be, open-minded on multiple respects. It's been clear, for some time, and from a cultural standpoint, from the type of guys that we want here, next month, this will be 10 years that I'll have lived in Memphis and have been, working for this team. And it's crystal clear to me that the type of players that happen to overlap also with what I think lead to success, from a team building standpoint, but the type of players that resonate, with this fan base that are impactful, to the city. It's the gritty guys. It's guys who have, that dog to their game. And for some time now, we have been emphasizing and are going to continue, to look for guys like that. And again, this is the work on the margins, like certainly not, we didn't do any of this with the expectation that a lot of these guys would come in and take on, some of the roles that they have this quickly. But when you look at the guys that we've actually brought in the organization over the last year or so, you look at Scottie Pippen, dog. Zach Edey, dog. Jalen Wells, dog. Cam Spencer's a effing grizzly bear. I mean, Cam Spencer's got that in spades, and I think he's got a bright future too. There's more work to be done, but like it's been clear, and there's a very clear vision of the type of guys that I think are going to help get us to the next level. They're young, that wasn't what we set out. At this point, a lot of these guys that have emerged, I'm not going to sit here and make bold proclamations today of exactly what spot that's going to put us in, but we're going to keep building, through that lens, and we're going to do everything we can to put this team in position to compete at the highest levels.
So just to be clear, the statement that you gave post-trade deadline about Ja, does that still stand?
No, nothing has changed. We're in an excellent spot with Ja. I firmly believe in him to be a leader and at the heart of this team going forward.
Zach, as you go through the process of evaluating who will coach this team, what are some of the benchmarks? What are the qualities that you're looking for to lead this team?
Yeah, it starts with culture. It starts with the approach, honesty, directness, no BS. I think there's been so much good, here over the years, but we've got to be more uncomfortable. We've got to embrace on all fronts, a willingness to operate in a way where it's not about making guys, feel good. It's that there's a lot of direct, tough conversations that have to be had. There's a standard that has to be upheld, every day, with the guys. I think it has to start there. Obviously, there's so much more that goes into the job, but I think that aspect of it is critical.
Zach, you talked about the work that needs to be done and there are decisions that have to be made. What are the priorities? What are the initial next steps that you have to take to start that process?
Sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
The next steps that you have to take. I mean, I know a lot of decisions are coming, whether it's the coaching staff or the roster, whatever. What are the specific next steps that you take from here?
Yeah, I obviously there's exit interviews today, so there's a lot of conversations to have. Things that I want to communicate, expectations heading into the summer. I expect a lot of good conversations over the course of the day. Then there's taking a step back, there's digesting. We've been doing the work already. The work doesn't start now, for this off season. We have eyes, right? Like we've seen this thing in real time, with the season going in a bad direction, where you really started to see it in early March, and kind of continue, from there. I think in a real way, I'm glad that we were able to recapture some fight. To me, it felt like there was slippage, over the course of that month. Things were not in a good place. The energy was off, with the group. And am I happy with the outcome? Of course not, at the end of the season. I am proud of the group. They fought to the bitter end in that series. They made it interesting when they easily could have let go of the rope. There's a lot to be said about the character, of this group. So I'm going to reflect on all of that. But the work, while all of that's playing out, I can't make, significant moves in any respect, other than a coaching change, right? Which I did, in March. But vis-a-vis the offseason preparation for free agency, for the draft, we're doing that year long. That's already been, that's something that we always do and already have ramped up, over recent months. And that work continues, going into the offseason. We're going to keep a very open mind of what are the things that we can do to take a step forward, as a team. And we won't know, overnight. The season's still, ongoing. We wish we were still playing. We're going to be talking through a bunch of different, what ways that we could play it out. Then we'll learn what's actually, there, what's available, what are the types of things on all fronts that we can do, and excited to see what's available.
So I just had to follow. So the coaching situation not necessarily first in terms of like more.
I'm certainly heavily focused on what comes next in the coaching situation. Of course, as you can tell, there's not news that I have not made a decision. There's not news thus there's nothing I can share on it today. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to digest everything, and as soon as I've made any determinations on that front, I of course will share it.
Zach, right here in the back.
Yeah.
3 years ago, you guys win a playoff series. You push the eventual champs in the second round. You look like the next young team that's going to make that step into championship contention. Since then, win 2 playoff games. Other young teams in the West have either caught up with you guys or surpassed you. Do you feel like it's fair to say in those 3 years you guys have either stagnated or taken a step back?
Yeah, we're not close, right? Like what I can do is sit here today and I don't think it's fair in any way for me to say, oh, we're right there on the verge of it. I think there's tough conversations. I think there's an open-mindedness, that we need going forward. I think this group's really talented. I think we unintentionally got younger, this time. And I feel really strongly about the talent level, of this group. And I feel really strongly about the cultural fit and the identity, of those young guys and what they can be, with this group. I think, obviously, we've talked about the core three, and of course, I feel strongly, about those guys. But of this, kind of younger cohort that played really significant roles and could take a step forward, like it's right there. Wish we could snap our fingers and we're not like, would love to have some gritty veteran, wing who could we're not one gritty veteran, wing away from winning a championship, right? We're going to keep, of course, we'd love to have, guys like that. And as I've said, I think there's work to be done, on multiple fronts, but I think this is a really talented, albeit unintentionally, younger group, at this point. And that is what it is. I think we're in a great position from a long-term, standpoint, and having a bunch of guys that, fit the identity and are talented and are going to get better. I'm not going to sit here and say, things that are wild vis-a-vis expectations, of where they are. That's probably not appropriate, at this point. But I've got a lot of belief in a lot of these guys. Talked a little bit about, each of them, in turn, but of Scotty, Jalen, Edie, and Cam. I mean, I think Scotty's emerged as someone that we have a lot of belief in, at least, as a rotation, player going forward. He played an even more significant role, down the stretch here, but I think he's a winning player who fits our identity, and excited to have Scotty on a multi-year contract where he's going to be, certainly view him as someone who's going to be with us, going forward. I thought Zach Edey, what a rookie year, he kind of endured, and to have made as positive of an impact as he had, over the course of this year, with all the crazy discourse around him that he's had for years. That's nothing, kind of new for him. But for a guy who didn't start playing basketball all that long ago, to play a very particular role at Purdue, where he received post touch after post touch and just got to, bang in the post, the entire time, and wasn't asked to do much defensively because he had to stay on the court, to beginning of the season where he was spacing and relocating and hitting threes at I think he's got great touch. I didn't expect him to shoot, necessarily as well as he did, and that was great. But that was new, and that was an evolution, and that probably, I think you could see, over the last month as we leaned much more heavily into a ball screen offense, which absolutely, optimized, Ja, and I do think there can be a lot of positives for Jaren there as well. Happy to talk about that. That's an aside, but Edey is far more optimized, and I think he's a little bit of a rhythm player. You get him in the action, I think you could start to see it slow down. You could start to see him really put it together. You could start to see him thrive in those situations. The discourse around Edey is so wild because his mistakes are loud. He's the 7'4" guy with a 7'11" wingspan who fights like hell, who, if he gets beat off the dribble, if he gets beat to the basket, if he bobbles the ball, it's more hyperbolic than it needs to be because it's a 7'4" guy and it's not something people have seen and it looks bad. You look up, though, he has an elite skill as an offensive rebounder. I think he has the potential to be a really good screener. I think he has the potential to be a really good ball screen player. And he was significantly better defensively over the course of the year than I expected. He got better every game in the series. He had 7 blocks, last night. The growth that I've seen for him, and I'm not going to put unnecessarily high expectations on him, but there's a clear track record of improvement. He cares. He's going to keep getting better. I'm glad he's with us, and I think he's going to be a big part of this group going forward too. Jalen Wells, I talked about a little bit before. Again, I had no expectations for what Jalen was going to be. We had enough. There was a low bar, because we're not trying. We want to surround this group with as much, veteran support and talent as we can. There was a pretty low bar, a high bar, I should say, of our two-way line, in that draft. There weren't that many guys in that draft that we wanted to roster. Jalen was one of the few that had any. We didn't think Jalen was going to be there at 39. He was one of the few guys that were like, if we could get him, it's worth it. Obviously, I'm glad we did. He thought it was going to be developmental, but his poise on both ends of the floor, embracing being the primary on-ball defender, which is not, a position that I don't think he expected to walk into, but did it with way more effectiveness than I would have anticipated, on that front. I was in the hospital with him till 2 a.m. in Charlotte, that night when he took what was a really scary fall, and the update on him, he's doing great. He's gonna be just fine, way ahead of next season. He's making really good progress, but when I was in there with him, this kid is completely unfazed. The only thing he was upset about was once he heard that his wrist was broken, that he was going to miss the postseason. He was devastated by that. He clearly had a concussion at the time. We didn't have neurologists, so we didn't have a formal diagnosis. Bleeding profusely from his head. Anyone would be a complete mess in that situation. He was completely unfazed by the whole situation, but just the frustration set in once he learned that he wasn't going to be able to play. That kid cares deeply, and I think he has a really bright future. So I have no bold proclamations on anything. I've got a lot of guys who I believe in that fit the identity of this group, and we're pushing forward together.
I'll try to squeeze in a couple.
Please.
If you could take a do-over on any one decision you've made since a year ago today in this situation, what would it be? And second, even though Jaren Jackson Jr. is under contract already for next season, how much of a priority is it to try to get some kind of extension with him this summer?
I'm trying to think of the transactions that we've done since a year ago today. I think it's important that I operate and continue to operate in a way where I'm not pointing fingers. I'm the first one. I'm my own biggest critic, and I've already raised my hand vis-a-vis the original, smart trade, and that was before that time. I think sometimes you feel the effects of decisions made earlier, as they play out over time. There's all kinds of counterfactuals, on the rest of the season. I don't regret the second trade. You can say what you will about this season. I think we're turning the page, and I wish we could have gotten more out of this. I do think the team we have more flexibility. We have a bunch of guys that we're completely invested in, going forward. I think we should have picked up Jake LaRavia's team option. I think the mistake was there, Yeah, going forward, because of the difficulties with that situation, we're probably better off with the second round pick, going forward from what we can do going forward. So it's not like a regret vis-a-vis. I think Jake could have helped us, down the stretch. So I think, vis-a-vis this season, yes, like would have been great, if we had him, with us down the stretch. You turn the page, which I have to do today. I'm thinking going forward. So like that's a little bit different. But the original decision is what put us, in that position. I thought that was a close call at the time. We went back and forth on it. Probably should have picked up Jake LaRavia's team option if I have to pick. That's probably not what people are focused on. But I think Jake's made, significant steps forward. He played well. I think I overweight. If anything, if there's something I think I'm guilty of, at the deadline, I think I had really high expectations for what Vince especially, and Gigi's really young, but also Gigi was really, played some really encouraging minutes, the year before. And this is nothing against them or what they could be, going forward. But coming off of serious injuries, in both cases, Gigi a little bit before, but Vince had, I think, just gotten back. And I think I probably overweighted just how much of a burden they'd be able to effectively take on at a really high level in the context of a playoff push, at that point in time. So could we have had, would Jake have helped us there? Yeah, for sure. So many questions to keep track of, but yes, vis-a-vis, do you mind just repeating the question so I make sure I get it right?
Even though Jaron's under contract already for next season, how much of a priority is to try to find some type of extension with him this summer?
Yeah, no, Jaron absolutely remains an extremely high, priority and someone that we completely, believe in to be at the very heart of this team going forward. There's so much nuance to different ways that extensions could work, and I'm probably not allowed to talk about them anyway. So I think in this setting, probably not worth me going into nooks and crannies of different, pathways and how that could influence the offseason. There's a lot of, avenues that we've been studying, thinking through, looking through, and we'll of course, give real thought to what puts the team in the best position, going forward. But we absolutely feel very strongly about Jaron.
Okay, and this is going to be the last question. We have to move on to
Looking back on the decision to make the coaching change, just did that have the desired effect over the last couple of games of the season?
Yeah, I probably didn't do this enough in my 2-whatever-minute press conference at the time. So just to reflect for a little bit more, there was so much good with Taylor, over the years. I think there was so much development, there was so much growth, there was a consistent, organized approach. I think he was able to get a lot, out of a lot of guys, and there were a lot of positives, over the years. So it was a difficult decision to make. Like I said before, of course, I'm around this team all the time. That was my decision only. I could see it. I think anyone who, I don't think everyone in the greater landscape necessarily is paying terribly close attention, but I think those who were watching closely could see there was a real defensive slippage. There wasn't belief, that we could beat, good teams. And I'm not saying the group just like entirely let go of the rope and gave up, but there were, some troubling performances against, teams that were not, at the higher end, of the league. And I do think we, over this recent stretch, I'm certainly not sitting here and saying, oh, that was some fantastic outcome, but I thought we were at least able to find, recapture our identity, play, not let go of the rope, play with some real spirit. Could have given in, I understand, vis-a-vis the play-in and all that. Like, I'd hear things like, oh, you should just get the pick. Like, no, like that's anti-competitive. That runs entirely counter to the type of organization that we are and the tone that we have to set. The group stayed locked in. We played a great game, there against Dallas to at least earn the playoff berth. And we could have let go of the rope against OKC. I'm not. There's no victory laps. There's no moral victories at all in that series. But excuse me, the group competed to the bitter end, and I'm proud of them. Thanks, guys.